I'm a 33-year-old man, and for the past 5 years I've been happily married to my wife Sarah, who's 31. Our marriage has been built on mutual trust, love, and respect. I always believed my family accepted her, maybe not with open arms, but at least without hostility. My mother and sister have always been involved. That's the best way to put it. They never overstepped in obvious ways, but there was always this undercurrent of something politeness that didn't quite reach warmth. Sarah sensed it before I did. She would mention how my mother seemed distant toward her, or how my sister would leave her out of conversations at family gatherings. I always told her it was just how my family was, reserved, traditional. I assured her she was overthinking it. I truly believed there was no malice, just a difference in personalities. Sarah was open, confident, and independent, while my family valued quiet, composed women who knew their place. But I never thought they would go as far as what we found out. It started with something small. We were at my parents' house for dinner, just a normal visit. My father had stepped away to take a phone call, my mother was in the kitchen with my sister, and I was outside on the patio. Sarah had gone inside to grab a pen from my dad's office so she could jot something down. She wasn't snooping, just looking for a pen, but instead she found a locked drawer in his filing cabinet. That wasn't particularly strange. Everyone has private things they keep locked away, but when she came back out, she mentioned it to me quietly. Why would your dad need a locked drawer in his office? I shrugged, probably tax documents or legal stuff. She let it go for the moment, but later that night, something happened that made that locked drawer a lot more interesting. My dad had a few drinks, nothing excessive, just enough to loosen his tongue a bit. He was reminiscing about past family events, going on about how our family had always been careful about the people who married in. Then almost offhandedly, he said, "We've kept records of all the women who came into our family." It was one of those moments where the room went quiet, even though no one else seemed to notice. I glanced at Sarah, and she looked at me, her face blank. I tried to laugh it off. What does that even mean? My dad waved his hand, dismissing it. Nothing bad, just we like to be thorough. Got to make sure people fit, you know? Sarah was done with the conversation at that point. I could feel it. She didn't push, didn't ask anything else, but she was already thinking about that locked drawer. Later that night, when we were getting ready to leave, she turned to me in the car and said, "I need you to open that drawer." I told her she was being ridiculous. It was just a filing cabinet. My dad was a private person. It wasn't a big deal, but she didn't let it go. Just check. Tomorrow, when they're not home. I sighed but agreed. I didn't think I would find anything. I thought this was just her being stubborn, trying to prove something that wasn't there. The next day, I went back to my parents' house under the pretense of picking something up. I knew my parents wouldn't be home, and my dad wasn't the type to have security cameras in his office. It took some effort, but I pried open the locked drawer. There were files. Several of them, labeled with names. One of them was Sarah's. I felt my stomach drop. I pulled it out and flipped it open, expecting, I don't know what, but not what I actually saw. Inside were documents, background checks, financial records, screenshots of her old social media posts, even notes about her suitability. I flipped through the pages, my hands tightening around the paper as I read phrases like independent nature, may cause long-term conflicts, family history acceptable but not ideal, past relationships indicate possible issues with submission. There were even handwritten notes from my mother and sister, too opinionated, not traditional enough. Questionable past relationships. Why didn't they last? My mouth went dry. I flipped to the last page, a risk assessment ranking her suitability as a spouse. I felt sick. I took pictures of everything and locked the drawer back up before leaving. I didn't know what to think. What did this mean? How long had they been doing this? Was it just Sarah? Or had they done this with my exes too? When I showed her, she barely spoke. She just read through it all, her hands trembling slightly. Then finally, she looked up at me and said, "I told you. I told you something was off." She wanted to confront them immediately, but I hesitated. I didn't know how to process it. Because if they had a file on Sarah, that meant they had made up their minds about her before they ever really knew her. It meant they had been watching her, judging her, planning around her, since the day I introduced her. It meant my family never truly accepted her. And worst of all, it meant they never trusted me to choose my own wife. Update 1. I walked into my parents' house with Sarah right beside me. The file was in my hand, the proof of everything they had been doing behind our backs. I barely knocked before stepping inside. My mother was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter like it was just another normal day. My father sat in the living room, reading the newspaper. My sister was on her phone, scrolling without a care in the world. Sarah didn't wait. She placed the file down on the kitchen counter, flipping it open. My mother looked at it, then up at Sarah, then at me. She didn't even look surprised. She just exhaled slowly, wiped her hands and said, "I assume you broke into the locked drawer." No anger, no guilt, just annoyance. I waited for an explanation, for her to realize how wrong this was, but she just crossed her arms. My father folded his newspaper, setting it aside like we were about to have a casual conversation. "Why?" Sarah's voice was sharp. "Why do you have a file on me? Why did you do background checks on me without my knowledge? Why did you think it was okay to track my life like some kind of..." My mother cut her off with a sigh. "Because it's necessary. We've always done this." My sister, still scrolling, barely looked up. "It's not personal. They did it with everyone. But later, when the family fallout grew, she clung harder to my mother's side. The same sister who had dismissed the files as not personal was now posting on Instagram about family betrayal and fake loyalty, trying to paint me as the villain. At the time, she seemed indifferent. But later, when the fallout intensified, she clung harder to our mother's side. She started posting on Instagram, making vague accusations about traitors and fake family loyalty, clearly furious that I had turned against the system she had grown up defending. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. I spoke before she could. This isn't normal. I flipped through the pages, holding up the risk assessment. You had a ranking system. You wrote down not traditional enough, as if that's some kind of flaw. My father leaned back in his chair, resting his arm over the back of it. This has been in place for generations. Back in your grandfather's time, a bad marriage almost cost the family everything, financially and socially. Ever since then, we've been careful about who we let in. It's our responsibility to protect you from bad choices. Sarah let out a short laugh, one without humor. Bad choices. She pointed at her name in the file. What exactly makes me a bad choice? That I have opinions, that I have a career, that I don't roll over and agree with everything your son says. My mother looked at her carefully. You're very independent. Sarah blinked, and that's a problem. There was a beat of silence before my sister finally looked up from her phone. Look, if you're going to get all emotional about it, just know it's nothing against you personally. Sarah inhaled sharply, and for the first time I realized how deep this went. This wasn't a slip-up. This wasn't a moment of bad judgment. This was how they operated. How long have you been doing this? I asked, my voice quieter now. My father shrugged. Your grandparents did it. We did it. It's been part of the family for generations. I turned to my sister. Did they do this to your fiancé? She rolled her eyes. Obviously. Everyone gets vetted. Sarah pressed her lips together, shaking her head in disbelief. This is insane. Sarah, my mother said, her voice the same tone she always used when she thought she was being reasonable. We didn't say no to you. We didn't tell our son not to marry you. We just needed to make sure you were the right kind of person. The right kind of person. Sarah repeated. And what? I'm not. My mother tilted her head. You haven't proven yourself yet. Sarah stepped back like she'd been physically hit. I stared at my mother. Are you serious? She shrugged. It takes time. We don't just trust blindly. Sarah turned to me. If you don't stand up for me right now, I don't know how we move forward. She didn't wait for my response. She turned and left. I hesitated for half a second before following her. But before I could step out, I heard a voice behind me. My aunt and uncle stood in the hallway. I hadn't even noticed them come in. My aunt's face was tight with discomfort, while my uncle rubbed his jaw like he was debating whether to speak. Finally, he sighed. I always thought this was too much. My mother shot him a sharp look, but he ignored it. My aunt hesitated before speaking. We never said anything because it wasn't our business, but it's not normal. It's not okay. My father waved them off. You two never understood tradition. My uncle shook his head. We understood just fine. That's why we stayed out of it. He turned to me. Your brother's fiancée found her file years ago. She almost left him over it. I stared, and he stayed. He convinced her it didn't matter. I looked at my mother again. Do you have a file on me? She didn't answer right away. That was enough of an answer. I turned and walked out, catching up with Sarah as she got into the car. She was shaking whether from anger or disbelief. I wasn't sure. She didn't look at me when I got in beside her. The drive home was silent. She went straight to the bedroom. I sat in the living room, staring at the file. I had always believed my family had my best interests at heart. I had always thought that they loved Sarah, but they never trusted me. They had been watching, judging, controlling, from the very beginning. And now, I had to make a choice. Update 2. The days after the confrontation were tense. Sarah was furious, not just at my family but at me for not realizing it sooner. How could you not see this? She asked one night, her voice shaking. I tried to explain, but she shook her head. I just need time to process this. She still spoke to me, but it wasn't the same. There was a wall between us now, and I didn't know how to fix it. At night, she lay stiffly on her side of the bed, not touching me. I knew why. To her, our entire marriage now felt tainted. If my family had been controlling things behind the scenes from the start, then what did that make me? Had I been a pawn in their game without realizing it? I tried to tell her that I had no idea, that I never would have allowed this if I had known, but the damage was done. Then my brother called. It wasn't unusual for him to reach out, but this time, there was something different in his voice. He told me he couldn't talk long. He was at work, but had to tell me something before our mother found out. He admitted that our parents had been controlling his life for years, that his fiancée almost left him when she found her file, and the only reason she stayed was because he promised to keep their influence out of their marriage. Then he said something that made my stomach turn. They did this with all of us. Every girlfriend, every fiancé. Some of them just never knew. I had to hear it for myself. That night, after Sarah went to bed, I searched for the numbers of 2 of my exes. I hadn't spoken to either of them in years, but I needed answers. The first one responded quickly. She was surprised to hear from me but agreed to talk. The moment I asked if my mother had ever spoken to her privately, she went quiet. Then after a long pause, she said, "So you finally figured it out." She told me that my mother had pulled her aside a few months into our relationship and warned her that I needed a traditional wife, someone who would support my family's values. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but then little things started happening. My mother would make offhanded comments about how my ex was too independent, too career-focused. My sister made a few snide remarks about how she didn't seem fully invested in me. Over time, doubt crept in, and she started feeling like she wasn't good enough. Eventually she left. I called the second ex. The story was almost the same. My mother had been polite but concerned. She told her I came from a strong family and needed someone who could fit into our way of life. It planted a seed of doubt that grew into a breakup. Both of them had walked away, not because I wasn't good to them, but because my family had manipulated them into believing they weren't the right fit. I sat in the dark, my phone still in my hand. How many relationships had they quietly destroyed? How many times had I thought things just didn't work out, when in reality my family had been pulling the strings? Sarah walked into the room, saw my face and asked what happened. I told her everything. She didn't speak right away. Then her voice cracked as she asked, "Would we even be married if I had known this back then?" I didn't have an answer. The next morning, I went back to my parents' house. I wanted the truth. My mother didn't even look surprised when I asked her how many women she had driven away. She shrugged. "Only the ones who weren't right for you." I gripped the back of a chair, trying to keep my voice level. "And you decided that, you and not me." She scoffed. "You weren't thinking with your head. We were protecting you." My father for the first time actually looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and admitted that he had never fully agreed with the family file system. But he went along with it because challenging your mother would have made life unbearable. But later, when I asked him if he would ever stand up to her, he sighed. "It's too late for that. I made my choice years ago and I have to live with it." I turned to my sister, but she just rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting. Sarah is making a big deal out of nothing." Sarah had been right all along. They never truly accepted her. They were waiting for her to prove herself. She was never part of the family. She was under evaluation. I told my parents they were never going to see Sarah again. My mother just waved a hand dismissively. "That's her choice. But don't be dramatic." When I got home, Sarah was packing a small bag. She wasn't leaving me. Not yet, but she was going to stay with a friend for a few days. She needed space. Before she left, she turned to me and said, "If you don't cut them off completely, I don't know if we can survive this." Then she was gone. Update 3. Sarah didn't come home that night, or the next. She texted me once, just to say she needed more time. I didn't push. I knew I had to do something. If I sat back and waited, I'd lose her. The next morning I made my choice. I sent my mother a simple message. "I need space. Please don't contact me for a while." Less than an hour later, my phone started ringing. I ignored the first call, then the second. By the third, I answered. My mother's voice was softer than usual, not angry, just disappointed. She wanted to know why I was doing this to her. She reminded me that everything they had done was out of love. She talked about how they raised me, how they sacrificed for me, how they just wanted what was best. Then she started crying. She said Sarah was changing me, that I was letting my marriage drive a wedge between us, that no woman should ever come before family. She kept talking about loyalty, about tradition, about how this family had always looked out for each other. Then finally, if Sarah really loved you, she wouldn't make you choose. I hung up. It wasn't long before my sister started texting Sarah, long paragraphs, accusations. She called Sarah manipulative, said she was poisoning me against the family, that she was playing the victim. At first my sister just rolled her eyes at the whole thing. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." But as more family members turned against our mother, her attitude shifted. Weeks later, Sarah sent me screenshots of my sister's Instagram, long paragraphs, about family betrayal and fake loyalty. Clearly now that she was losing, she was lashing out. I told my sister to stop. She ignored me. The next day, my aunt called. She had heard about the fight. Word was spreading through the family. Some relatives took my mother's side, saying she was just looking out for me. Others were horrified. My aunt admitted that she always hated the family file system, but never spoke up because she didn't want to be the next target. Then my brother called again. This time he didn't sound rushed. He told me he had spent years living in quiet resentment. He hated the control, but he never fought back because it was easier to just go along with it. I stayed. He admitted. I let them push my fiancé into accepting it. And now, I don't know if she really trusts me. I don't know if she ever will. Sarah's best friend posted about the situation online. No names, no direct identifiers, just a general story about a toxic, controlling family that kept files on every woman who married in. OP's mother soon found out, assuming Sarah was behind it, and called OP in a fury, demanding he make her take it down, even though he had no involvement. The post exploded. Thousands of people weighed in. The overwhelming response was disgust. People called it disturbing, obsessive, a major red flag. I didn't even realize what had happened until my mother called again. This time she wasn't crying. She was furious. She accused Sarah of ruining the family's reputation, said she was turning the world against them. Then she demanded that I make Sarah take the post down. I told her I had nothing to do with it. She didn't believe me. My sister jumped in, sending me screenshots of the post, highlighting the worst comments, people calling my parents controlling, toxic, abusive. The damage was done. My father was quieter about it. Later that night, he sent me a simple message. "Can we talk?" I met him alone. He didn't defend my mother. He didn't excuse anything. He just sat there staring at the table, before finally saying I shouldn't have gone along with it. I waited. I knew it was wrong. He admitted, "But it's how this family has always done things. And your mother, she doesn't change." I asked if he would ever stand up to her. He shook his head. "It's too late for that." That was the last conversation we had. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me. She didn't ask what my father had said. She didn't ask what my mother had done. She just said, "I can't live like this." Then the words that changed everything. "If you don't cut them off, I don't know if I can stay." I didn't hesitate this time. I blocked my mother, my sister, and most of the family. But it didn't stop them. They found ways: unknown numbers, fake accounts, third-party messages. I sent my father one final message, telling him he could reach out if he ever decided to leave this toxic system. Then I turned my phone off. But within an hour, my phone lit up with calls from unknown numbers. I didn't recognize them at first. But after the third attempt, I realized they were using burner phones or private numbers to bypass the block. A few hours later, an unknown number started calling. I didn't recognize it at first. But after the third call, I realized they were using new numbers to get through to me. When Sarah came home that night, I was still there, waiting, and for the first time in days, she reached for my hand. Update 4. Sarah packed her things quietly. She moved with purpose, not wasting a second. She wasn't leaving for good, at least. That's what I kept telling myself. But she needed space. More than that, she needed distance from my family, from me. She didn't slam the door when she left. She didn't yell. She just walked out. I sat in the silence, staring at the empty space where she had been. For the first time, it hit me. Really hit me. I wasn't just fighting with my family anymore. I was losing my marriage. I barely slept that night. I barely moved. The next day, my mother called. I didn't answer. She called again. Then my sister. Then my father. Finally, I picked up. There was no concern in my mother's voice. No regret, just calm certainty. "This was bound to happen," she said. "I told you she wasn't the one." My grip on the phone tightened. She continued, explaining that Sarah's decision to leave only proved what they had been saying all along, that she wasn't committed, that she was too independent, that a real wife wouldn't have walked away. I told her, point blank, that she had destroyed my marriage. She didn't even hesitate. "No, she destroyed it," she said. "She made you choose. And now she's gone." I hung up. I drove back to my parents' house. Not to talk, not to argue. I needed to see something. When I got there, my mother and sister were in the kitchen. My father was in his chair, silent as ever. I didn't say a word to them. I went straight to my dad's office, logging into his computer. It was risky. He was meticulous about security. But when I searched his emails, I found it, a folder labeled Family Archive. Inside, spreadsheets, reports, notes, one labeled with my name. My strengths, my weaknesses, handwritten observations from my mother. Easily influenced, needs firm guidance to stay on the right path. Tendency to seek approval, use this to reinforce family values. Shows occasional defiance, must be reminded of responsibility to the family. There were records of past decisions I had made, schools, jobs, friendships, along with comments about whether they had been acceptable or not. Everything I had done, every major choice, had been monitored, controlled, manipulated. I turned around, files still in my hand. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't even surprised. I had found it. She just raised an eyebrow. "You always needed guidance." I asked how long this had been going on. She said, "Since I was a teenager." My brother walked in then. He looked at the file in my hands. He knew even before I said anything. My mother didn't deny it. She told him they had files on him too, that they had always kept track, that it was just part of being in this family. Something in him broke. He turned to me and said, "I'm done." And then, just like that, he walked out. I followed him outside. He was shaking. He muttered that he had always felt controlled, but never knew the extent of it, that his entire life had been mapped out by them, that every decision he thought he had made for himself had probably been nudged in their direction. He left. I stayed. I went back inside, placed my file on the table, and told my parents they had one chance: destroy the files, go to therapy, admit they were wrong. My mother didn't even blink. "If you walk away from us," she said, "you're dead to me." My sister scoffed. "You'll come crawling back when your marriage fails." I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something. Anything. He just looked down. I walked out. That night, I called Sarah. I told her everything. I told her about my file, about my brother, about how deep the control went. She listened. Then after a long silence, she asked me one question. Are you free now? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Update 5. Sarah came back home the next evening. She had a suitcase in one hand and her keys in the other. There was no grand reunion, no dramatic embrace, just a quiet understanding. She wasn't coming back because everything was magically fixed. She was coming back because I had finally done what needed to be done. She placed her bag down by the door and looked around, like she was seeing our home for the first time. No more calls from my mother. No more texts from my sister. No more guilt weighing over every conversation. She exhaled and nodded. For the first time in weeks, she let me hold her. The next morning, I started therapy. I had spent my entire life under my mother's control without realizing how deep it went. My brother had lived in the same cage, and Sarah had been under surveillance from the moment she entered my life. I wasn't going to let that define me anymore. While I worked through my own healing, my mother was busy rewriting history. She started calling relatives, spinning the story in her favor. According to her, Sarah had brainwashed me. She had turned me against my own blood. My mother made it seem like I had been tricked into cutting my family off, like I was being manipulated by my own wife. Some relatives saw right through her. Others didn't. A few reached out, trying to convince me to make peace with my parents. I shut that down immediately. Then, my brother called again. He had been doing some digging of his own. He told me that our mother didn't just keep files on spouses. She had dirt on nearly everyone in the family. Cousins, aunts, in-laws, background checks, personal notes, observations on who was trustworthy and who wasn't. We weren't the only ones she had been controlling. We needed proof. That's when our aunt stepped in. She had always stayed out of family conflicts, never taking sides. But this time, she did something unexpected. She told us she had access to some of the files. She didn't agree with what our mother had been doing, but she had never spoken up. Now, with everything blowing up, she wanted to help. She made copies. We sent them out. Relatives who had once dismissed my mother's behavior suddenly saw the truth in black and white. My mother had background reports on my cousin's wife, notes about my uncle's job history, comments about who in the family could be trusted and who couldn't. The family's reaction was mixed. Some relatives immediately demanded answers, while others dismissed the entire situation as an exaggeration. A few in-laws took a step back, avoiding my mother's calls, but it wasn't an overnight collapse. It took weeks for more relatives to realize just how deep her manipulation ran. Slowly, the social fallout grew, isolating my mother more and more as people distanced themselves from her. The fallout spread fast. My mother went silent for days. Then, when she finally did speak up, it wasn't to apologize. She doubled down. She called it family security. She said she had been protecting the family from bad influences, that she had done what was necessary to ensure stability. No one was buying it. Her reputation was in shambles. The family gatherings she had once ruled over, gone. The relatives who used to hang on her every word, silent. Even my sister, who had defended her so aggressively, was feeling the consequences. Multiple cousins had cut her off completely. She had backed the wrong side, and now she was being left behind with the rest of them. As for my father, I didn't hear from him directly, but word got back to me that he was miserable. He had spent his whole life under my mother's thumb, and now, he was stuck there. Still, he refused to break away. Sarah, on the other hand, was finally starting to heal. For the first time since we found that file, she wasn't looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. She slept better. She started smiling again. Our marriage, something my mother had tried so hard to tear down, was stronger than ever. And then, just when I thought it was over, my mother made one last attempt. An email. Short. Direct. You'll regret this when she leaves you. I read it once. Then, without a second thought, I deleted it. Update 6. For a month there was nothing. No calls, no texts, no guilt-tripping emails. For the first time in my life, my world was quiet. Sarah and I started settling into our new normal. No more walking on eggshells. No more waiting for the next ambush. I could breathe again. She could breathe again. Then, a letter arrived. It wasn't handwritten. It wasn't from my mother. It was from a lawyer. A formal request demanding the return of family documents. I consulted a lawyer of my own, who reviewed the letter and confirmed it was a scare tactic. Legally, they had no grounds to demand the return of the files, since they contained personal data collected without consent. They were bluffing, hoping to intimidate me. I immediately consulted a legal expert, who confirmed that their request had no legal standing. It was a scare tactic. Nothing more. The leaked files. Sarah read it over my shoulder, her grip on the paper tightening. She didn't say anything at first, just waited for my reaction. I called my aunt. She laughed. There was no legal ground. My parents had no real case. They were bluffing, trying to scare me into submission. Sarah wasn't convinced. She worried this was just the beginning. I reassured her. But then, my brother called. He had his own update. Our mother was spiraling. More family members had cut contact with her. Some outright blocked her. Others just stopped responding to her calls. She wasn't used to losing. and my sister wasn't taking it well either. That night, she went on a full social media rant. Instagram stories, vague captions, passive-aggressive posts about fake family members and traitors. She didn't name me, but everyone knew who she was talking about. I ignored it. Then, another email. This time, from my mother. She called it a final conversation. She wanted to meet, just the two of us. She framed it as a last chance to fix things. Sarah read it and shook her head. She didn't tell me what to do. She just made her own stance clear. She was done. I thought about it for a while, really thought about it, and then, I blocked my parents' numbers. It was over. Or so I thought. A week later, my father left me a voicemail. His voice was stiff, rehearsed. He told me that if I didn't apologize, I'd be removed from the will. I almost laughed. Like money could undo everything that had happened. Like I would suddenly forget the years of control, the manipulation, the surveillance of my own marriage. I deleted the message without responding. Then, another one came. This time, a text. A different tone. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. I never liked the files. I never thought it was right. But, your mother has a way of making sure things go her way. If I had spoken up back then, I would have been the one cut out. He looked away. I made my choice a long time ago. And now, I have to live with it. That he hoped one day I'd understand. He wouldn't fight for me. Not now. Not ever. And that was all I needed to hear. I deleted the message. Sarah and I sat on the couch that night, not saying much. The TV played in the background, but neither of us were really paying attention. She reached for my hand. For the first time in months, she didn't look tense. She didn't look guarded. No more surprise messages. No more manipulation. No more them. We had finally won. Update 7. A full year had passed since I cut my family off. A year of silence. A year of peace. Sarah and I were in the best place we'd ever been. No more fights about my family. No more stress hanging over our relationship. No more walking on eggshells, waiting for the next manipulation attempt. I had stayed in therapy, unraveling the damage my mother had done. I had spent my entire life under her influence, thinking it was just normal parenting. But it wasn't. It was control disguised as love. And now, for the first time in my life, I was free. Sarah and I had another reason to be happier than ever. We were expecting our first child. We hadn't told anyone. Not my family. Not even my aunt, the one who had helped expose everything. We kept it quiet, enjoying the news on our own terms. Then, a few weeks ago, I got an update from my brother. Our mother's control over the family had crumbled. More relatives had distanced themselves. Some had gone fully no contact. Others kept her at arm's length, no longer treating her as the authority figure she had always been. She had lost her power. But not everyone had walked away. My aunt, our biggest ally in the fight against my mother, had reconnected with her. I didn't know why. Maybe guilt. Maybe a sense of obligation. Either way, it made me cautious. If my aunt was back in my mother's life, that meant anything I told her could make its way back. Sarah and I agreed. We wouldn't tell anyone about the baby. Then, a familiar number popped up on my phone. My sister. She hadn't spoken to me in a year. No messages. No calls. Now, out of nowhere, she sent a simple text, pretending like nothing had ever happened. A casual "hope you're doing well." I ignored it. Then, another discovery. Sarah checked her social media notifications and saw a request from an account with no profile picture, no followers, and a generic name. At first she ignored it, but after receiving multiple requests from similar accounts, we did some digging. Using a secondary account, we baited the sender into a conversation, only to discover it was my mother, trying to keep tabs on us. Different accounts. Same behavior. It didn't take long to figure out the truth. My mother was using fake accounts to stalk Sarah online. We locked everything down. Sarah went private on every platform. We blocked every possible account that could be linked to my family. Then, another message. This time from my father. It was short. "Congratulations. Your mother doesn't know yet." I stared at the screen. He knew about the baby. Somehow, through someone, he had found out. But instead of telling my mother, he had sent me a quiet, private message. I didn't respond. We made our final decision that night. My mother would never know about our child. We wouldn't give her the chance to manipulate, control, or poison the next generation. And then the last bit of news came through. A cousin reached out, telling me my mother had started playing the victim. She was telling people I had abandoned her, that she was a grieving mother whose son had been stolen away by an ungrateful wife. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't reflecting. She was rewriting the story to make herself the victim. I considered sending one last message, a final goodbye. Sarah looked at me and said, "Why bother?" And she was right. My mother didn't deserve a dramatic send-off. She didn't deserve closure. So instead, I just deleted her number. For good. Update 8. Despite everything, the news still found its way to my mother. I suspected it was my father. He had been the first to find out. After all, maybe he slipped. Or maybe my sister heard through someone else. Either way, she knew. I don't know who told her. Maybe my father. Maybe my aunt. Maybe my sister. desperate to stay in my mother's good graces. It didn't matter. The flood of messages started immediately. At first, they were polite. Requests. Please. I just want to be a part of my grandchild's life. You don't have to forgive me, but don't punish the baby. Then, the guilt tripping began. You'll never understand what it's like to be a mother, to have your own child shut you out. I did everything for you, and this is how you repay me. When I ignored those, she escalated. Angry messages, accusations. She called Sarah a manipulator, said I had been brainwashed, demanded I give her a chance to fix things. I blocked her again. Then she showed up at my house. It was late afternoon. I had just gotten home from work. Sarah was in the nursery folding tiny baby clothes, getting everything ready. The knock was loud, too loud. I opened the door, and there she was, my mother. She looked different, more tired, more desperate. She didn't barge in. She didn't scream. She clasped her hands together and begged. She wanted to be let in. She wanted to talk. She wanted to be in the baby's life. Sarah didn't even come to the door. She stayed in the nursery, ignoring the entire thing. I told my mother to leave. Her voice cracked as she pleaded. Then, the moment she realized I wasn't caving, the mask slipped. The real her came out. She started yelling, accusing Sarah of stealing me, saying I had turned my back on my real family, screaming that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Neighbors peeked out their windows. Some watched from their porches. I told her to get in her car and leave, or I'd call the police. That finally got through to her. But as she walked away, she turned back one last time and said, "You'll regret this." Then she was gone. That night Sarah and I talked about getting a restraining order. It wasn't an overreaction. She had already stalked Sarah online, showed up uninvited, and made a public scene. What was stopping her from doing something worse? We decided to wait. But if she tried anything again, we wouldn't hesitate. A few days later, she took her meltdown online. A long emotional Facebook post about how her evil daughter-in-law had stolen her son and her grandchild, how she was a mother in mourning. She framed it like we had died. Relatives messaged me, shocked. Some reached out in concern. Others just wanted to hear my side of the drama. I ignored them all. Then my sister jumped in. She publicly commented on my mother's post, calling me heartless for cutting out the one person who truly loved me. She had made her choice. Then the last message came. My father. She was just emotional. She didn't mean it. I deleted it without responding. The next few months were quiet. Then the most important day of our lives came. Sarah gave birth. It was beautiful, emotional, perfect. Her family was there. Her mother, her siblings, the people who had supported us through everything. My parents weren't there. My sister wasn't there. And for the first time, I didn't even think about them. We were finally free. A week later, a package arrived. No return address. But I knew exactly who it was from. Inside was a knitted baby blanket, a small stuffed bear, and a letter. "Someday you'll realize you need me." I threw it away without a second thought. That night Sarah held our baby close, tears in her eyes, not from sadness, not from stress, from relief. "Thank you for choosing us." I had spent my whole life being controlled, manipulated, and monitored, but my child would never know what that felt like. Before the year was over, I made one last decision. I legally changed my last name. The process wasn't instant. It took months of paperwork and legal adjustments. Sarah and I had long discussions about it, and while she decided to keep her name, she fully supported my choice. In the end, it was the final step in breaking free from my mother's control. A fresh start, for me, for Sarah, for our child, forever.